The world I knew was simple, predictable, and, in many ways, a quiet routine. Every morning, I'd wake up to the familiar hum of the coffee machine, the smell of strong black coffee filling the small kitchen of my apartment. The soft tap of my fingers on the keyboard was a constant, as I worked as a copywriter at a small marketing firm. My life wasn't filled with grand adventures or significant changes, just a steady stream of work, errands, and family dinners on weekends. I was in my late 20s, a little too old to still be figuring things out, but I hadn't reached a place of clarity. I didn't have a clear sense of what I wanted or even needed. But I did have my family, my parents, a younger brother, and most significantly, my grandfather. The man was a quiet presence in my life, always around when needed, his gruff voice carrying warmth despite his sharp exterior. Grandpa was a man of few words. Growing up, I always admired his stoic nature. He didn't express emotions easily, nor did he engage in long conversations about life's deeper questions. He was a man of action, of logic. Whenever I was unsure about something, he had a way of giving advice that cut through the clutter of my thoughts, even though his words were minimal. He didn't believe in elaborate speeches, but in practicality. In the weeks before the incident, I had visited him at his house more often than usual. He'd been getting frail, his once strong frame becoming thinner with each passing month. The last time I saw him, he had been lying on his recliner, his eyes slightly dimmed by age, yet his mind was still sharp. There was something different about him then, though. Something I couldn't place. He'd been distant, almost as if he were anticipating something. But, of course, I hadn't known then what was coming. I went about my daily life, navigating relationships with friends who had their own struggles, my younger brother who seemed to be drifting farther from the family as he pursued his career abroad, and my parents, who always seemed preoccupied with their own version of the world. My days had become filled with minor irritations. Missed calls from people I didn't feel like talking to, a nagging feeling that my life was too small for the dreams I once held. It wasn't until the phone call from my mom that things started to shift. I had just finished a busy day at work, thinking of grabbing some takeout and sinking into my couch to binge-watch something. But when I saw my mom's name flash on my screen, I answered quickly, thinking it was just another update about how Grandpa was doing. It wasn't. "Grandpa's gone," she said simply. There's a moment in everyone's life when they are struck by news so unexpected, so final, that it temporarily paralyzes them. The air feels thick, the mind struggles to comprehend. That was me in that moment. My world, which had always felt somewhat predictable, came to a screeching halt.
Grandpa? Gone?
I hadn't been prepared for that, despite the fact that he'd been aging. In my mind, he was a fixture, solid and unchanging. I immediately went to my parents' house. The house felt empty, without him in it. I knew this was the final goodbye, the moment when his presence would only live in memory. But there was more to this goodbye than I realized at the time. In the days that followed, we made arrangements for the funeral, handling all the necessary tasks that come with the death of a loved one. But something felt off. It wasn't just the loss of Grandpa that made my stomach twist. It was the growing sense that there were things about him, things about my family, that I had never understood. There was always a feeling of secrecy, especially when it came to matters like his will. I wasn't close to many of my relatives, and I had always assumed that things would be simple when Grandpa passed. His wealth was modest. He had never been a man to flaunt his success. But as the funeral passed and we gathered at my parents' house for the reading of the will, a sense of unease settled over me. I didn't understand it at the time, but I was about to find out that everything I thought I knew about my family and my grandfather was about to change forever. Grandpa had always been the kind of man who said little, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. I had always looked up to him. In fact, I admired his silence more than anything else. But that day, as the will was read, something shifted. His last words, the ones I had never imagined hearing, reverberated in the air like a thunderclap, shaking everything I knew. At that moment, I had no idea what was coming. All I knew was that Grandpa's death would be the end of something I had long taken for granted, and the beginning of a journey I never expected to take. The reading of Grandpa's will was nothing like I had expected. I had always imagined these things would be simple, just a list of belongings, a few final wishes, maybe a mention of who gets what. But what I didn't anticipate was the bombshell that was dropped with the first words of the document. The lawyer, who had been a family friend for years, cleared his throat and began reading in a formal tone. I remember the way his voice seemed to echo in the silence of the room. Everyone sat around the table, my parents, my brother, a few distant relatives, and I could feel their discomfort, their unspoken tension. But the lawyer's words weren't the ones that were unsettling. It was the context that followed them. The first line of the will was a message addressed to me. To my granddaughter, Sarah. You have always been the one I trusted with my most important secrets. Now, it's time to tell you everything. I remember the immediate shock that rippled through the room. No one had expected this. Everyone turned their eyes toward me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion.
I
Could see my mother's tight grip on her napkin, and my brother's frown deepened, as though he were trying to decipher something I couldn't understand. The lawyer continued, reading out instructions for my immediate family, items and estates that had been left to them, but the air was thick with something more than the usual words of a will. I could sense it then. Grandpa had planned for something bigger, something that none of us had ever been a part of, at least not openly. It wasn't until later, when the lawyer revealed the next part of Grandpa's will, that the pieces began to fall into place. The rest of the family was left with their shares, yes. But Grandpa's final, cryptic words left a lingering sense of confusion and anticipation. Sarah, there is a truth you must uncover. It will be revealed soon, but you must trust in it. Seek what I have hidden, and you will understand the true nature of our family. The moment those words left the lawyer's mouth, I felt as though the room itself had turned upside down. This wasn't just a will, it was a message. Grandpa had known something. There was something he had hidden from everyone. What do you think he meant? My brother asked, his voice quieter than usual. He wasn't normally one for deep thoughts, but this seemed to have caught him off guard. He leaned forward, a look of both curiosity and suspicion clouding his face. I don't know, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. But we need to figure it out. We all sat in stunned silence as the reality of Grandpa's final words began to sink in. No one spoke, not even my parents, who normally would have filled the silence with some form of explanation or judgment. It was as if the words had left us all searching for answers we didn't have. In the days that followed, I began to do what I had never done before. Investigate. Grandpa's life, which had always seemed simple and straightforward, now seemed shrouded in layers of complexity. I started to ask questions that should have been obvious from the beginning, but were now emerging in a way I couldn't ignore. Why had Grandpa trusted me with these secrets? Why had he hidden them so carefully? It became clear that there was more to Grandpa's legacy than I had ever realized. There were places he'd been, people he'd known, and transactions he'd made that I had never heard of before. I started going through his things. Old books, dusty folders, and long-forgotten letters hidden in drawers. The more I uncovered, the deeper the mystery seemed to grow. There were traces of something hidden in plain sight, but nothing solid enough to explain what was happening. One evening, as I sifted through a box of old family photographs, I found something odd. A small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, the handwriting neat and precise. I knew this was something important. Grandpa had never been the type to leave things behind unless they held meaning. I opened the first page, and there it was, the name of a place I had never heard of, followed by a set of coordinates. No explanation, just the words, find it and you'll find everything you need. I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement mixed with fear. What was Grandpa trying to tell me? Why would he leave something like this? And why me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that whatever Grandpa had been involved in, it wasn't just about money or property, it was about something bigger. Something hidden beneath the surface of my family's seemingly ordinary life. My grandfather had been more than just a quiet old man. He had been part of something that none of us had known about, and now, it was up to me to uncover it. It wasn't long before I made up my mind. I had to go to the place mentioned in Grandpa's journal. I had no idea what I would find there, but I knew I couldn't back out. Not now. That's when the first obstacle appeared. I wasn't the only one interested in Grandpa's hidden legacy. I had always thought that the family would be united in their grief and the reading of the will, but something had shifted in the air. My mother, who had been relatively quiet, suddenly became more vocal. She began to ask more questions than usual, looking at me with suspicion when I would mention the journal or the coordinates. I could see it in her eyes. She was hiding something, but I didn't have time to confront her. I had to keep moving forward. The deeper I dug into the mystery of Grandpa's final words, the more it became clear this was no ordinary inheritance. This was a legacy of secrets, hidden from everyone for reasons that were still unclear. And I was the one who was about to unravel them. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something vast, something far beyond what I had imagined when Grandpa first passed away. His will had been a shocking revelation, but it was only the beginning. With each passing day, the mystery surrounding his final words grew more complex, and the weight of my new role, his chosen heir to something I still didn't understand, pressed heavily on me. That evening, after finding the journal, I decided to act. I couldn't wait any longer. Grandpa had trusted me with this mission, and it was clear that the family's attention would only be on the material inheritance. But I had a different purpose. The coordinates, the cryptic entries in Grandpa's handwriting, they were my path forward. Before I could set off, I knew I had to keep my movements under wraps. My mother's sudden change in behavior had left me uneasy, and my brother, who had always been the practical one, was becoming more concerned about the family's estate than the hidden messages Grandpa had left behind. I had learned long ago not to trust everything my family said, especially when money was involved. Grandpa's inheritance was not just a financial matter. It was something far more valuable, and I was the only one who could unlock its secrets. I made a plan. The first step was simple: get to the place Grandpa had marked on the journal. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that nothing about this would be easy. The world was not kind to those who sought to uncover hidden truths. I had no idea what awaited me, but I was determined to find out. The next morning, I started to gather everything I would need for the journey. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends. The less people knew, the safer I would be. The location Grandpa had mentioned wasn't far, but it was remote, tucked away in the countryside. I had no idea what I would find when I got there, but I couldn't turn back now. I packed the journal, a map, a flashlight, and a notebook for my own observations. As I prepared, I found myself doubting my decision. What if this was some mistake? What if Grandpa hadn't meant for me to find this? The thought of abandoning this search never crossed my mind, but the fear lingered like a shadow. I had no answers, only a growing sense that this journey would lead to something far bigger than I was prepared for. And yet, I couldn't ignore the pull. Grandpa's trust in me was too strong. Before I left, I stopped by the family house one last time. My mother and brother were in the kitchen, discussing mundane things as usual, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension. My mother's smile was thin, too controlled. She glanced at me briefly, but said nothing. It was as though she was watching me carefully, as though she suspected I was up to something. I walked out the door without saying a word, feeling the weight of their unspoken judgment hanging in the air. The journey to the coordinates wasn't long, but the closer I got, the more the world seemed to shift. The trees grew thicker, the roads narrower, until I found myself deep in unfamiliar territory. The destination Grandpa had pointed me to was a small, isolated cabin at the edge of a forest. At first, it seemed unremarkable, a rundown place hidden from view. But there was something undeniably strange about it, something that didn't sit right. The air felt heavier here, like it carried the weight of untold stories. I stood in front of the cabin, staring at it, unsure of what to do next. There were no signs, no clues, only the feeling that I was being watched. As though Grandpa had set this moment in motion long before I even knew it. The sun had started to dip below the horizon, and the shadows grew longer, stretching across the ground like fingers. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. With the journal in hand, I walked toward the door, my heart pounding with every step. I knocked, just in case anyone was inside. The knock echoed in the silence of the forest, but there was no answer. The cabin appeared abandoned, empty, forgotten. Yet something still felt off. I tried the door handle, and to my surprise, it creaked open easily. Inside, the space was dark and musty, with only a few slivers of light seeping in through cracks in the wooden walls. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a few pieces of old furniture. Nothing remarkable at first glance. But then I noticed something on the floor, half hidden behind an old rug, a small, iron key. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a place like this. It was ornate, carved with intricate patterns, and it felt too important to be a simple piece of metal. I picked it up, holding it carefully, trying to figure out its significance. Was this a clue? A key to something more? Grandpa's journal had hinted at finding something, but what exactly? The answer wasn't clear yet, but the more I turned the key over in my hand, the more I felt an unsettling certainty that it was the key to unlocking the next step in this mystery. As I pocketed the key, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned to leave the cabin, my senses heightened, alert for anything that might be watching. The door slammed shut behind me, as though urging me to leave. But before I could take another step, I heard a sound, a low, grating noise from behind me, coming from the woods. I didn't hesitate. I ran. The dark woods closed in around me as I sprinted toward my car. Every step seemed to echo in the quiet. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. When I reached the safety of my car, I looked back to see nothing. The forest was still, and the cabin was lost in the shadows. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, something unseen but deeply unsettling. Once I was safely inside the car, I sat for a moment, catching my breath. What had just happened? Why had the atmosphere turned so dangerous? And what was the meaning of the key I had found? I didn't have answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I was closer to uncovering Grandpa's secret. And there was no turning back. I couldn't shake the feeling that the key was just the beginning of something far more significant, something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my life, and even the legacy Grandpa had left behind. I drove home that night with a mix of excitement and dread, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. As the days passed, the urgency grew. The family had started gathering for the reading of Grandpa's will, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer to uncover the truth. The key I had found didn't fit anywhere obvious. I knew I had to use it, but where? What was its purpose? By the time I arrived at the family house, I could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was there, the relatives, the lawyers, the curious neighbors, all waiting for the moment when Grandpa's final wishes would be made clear. The mood in the house was heavy, as though everyone knew something big was about to happen. I walked into the room, my hand still clutching the iron key, my heart pounding with every step. The family turned to look at me as I entered. My mother gave me a tight-lipped smile, but I could see the anxiety in her eyes. She knew something had changed. The lawyer, an old family friend who had been with us for years, stood at the front of the room, holding a sealed envelope. "I believe it's time," he said, his voice low and formal. He opened the envelope, glanced at the contents, and then hesitated. I saw the brief flicker of confusion in his eyes, a shift in his posture that made me pause. But before he could say anything, the lawyer glanced at me. "You found it, didn't you?" His words were pointed, deliberate. I froze. How could he know? My thoughts raced as I tried to make sense of his sudden question. My heart skipped a beat, but I nodded slowly, the key still tucked securely in my pocket. The lawyer motioned for me to step forward. The air seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Something was about to happen that I wasn't prepared for. "Your grandfather," he began, "left instructions that only you could unlock his true legacy." His voice was steady, but there was a strange tension in his eyes. It was never about the estate or the wealth, but something much more significant. Something he believed you were destined to uncover. I felt a cold shiver run through me. I had been right to trust my instincts. Grandpa's legacy was more than just a financial inheritance. It was a secret, one that had been carefully hidden for years, buried under layers of deception and family pride. He handed me a thick envelope, sealed with wax. I hesitated, unsure of what I was about to discover. But as soon as I held it in my hands, everything around me seemed to fade into the background. I opened the envelope with trembling hands and pulled out a letter, its edges worn and faded with age. It was Grandpa's handwriting, unmistakable even after all these years. The letter read, "To my dear grandchild, I have lived a life of many secrets, some of which I hope you never uncover. But one secret, a truth I've carried with me, is meant for you alone. The key you have found is not just a symbol, it is the key to understanding the true nature of our family's legacy. It has been hidden from the world for generations, protected by those who feared it. But now it is your turn to reveal it. This key opens a door, one that has been sealed for centuries. Inside, you will find the truth about our ancestors, a treasure far beyond gold or land. But be warned, not everyone will be pleased by what you uncover. Trust only yourself, for the ones who claim to love you may not have your best interests at heart. Go to the old mansion. There you will find the answers you seek. And remember, sometimes the greatest wealth is not in what you find, but in what you learn along the way. With love, Grandfather." The words felt like a hammer, striking me with their weight and power. The mansion. Grandpa had always spoken of it in hushed tones, a place we were never supposed to visit. It had been abandoned for decades, the place where my great-grandparents had once lived, a crumbling, eerie mansion hidden deep in the woods. I looked up from the letter, my mind reeling with the revelation. The family gathered around me, their eyes wide, their mouths silent, waiting for my response. They had no idea what I had just uncovered, but I could sense their curiosity, their thirst for the treasure they thought was hidden within this inheritance. But I wasn't interested in treasure, not in the way they were. I was interested in the truth. The truth that Grandpa had entrusted to me, even as he had warned me about the dangers ahead. I turned to the lawyer, my voice steady, but filled with urgency. "Where is the mansion?" He hesitated before answering, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It's far from here, in the hills, almost forgotten. But I warn you, don't go there alone." "I'll be fine," I said firmly, cutting him off. "I have to go. It's the only way to finish what Grandpa started." As I stepped out of the room, the weight of the family's stares on my back, I could feel the sense of inevitability closing in. The mansion loomed in my mind, a place of mystery, a place where everything would change. I had no idea what I would find there, but I knew this was the moment. The truth was within my reach, and I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered it. The journey to the mansion would be dangerous, but it would also be the final step in unlocking Grandpa's greatest secret, the one that had been hidden for generations. And once I stepped inside, I knew I would never be the same again. The journey to the mansion was long and treacherous. The road grew more difficult to navigate as I ascended into the hills, the air thick with tension and mystery. The mansion, Grandpa's secret, was not a place that welcomed visitors. The structure loomed in the distance, like a forgotten relic, standing as a silent witness to the past. It had been abandoned for years, its windows shattered, its once grand facade now cracked and weathered by time. As I approached, I could almost feel the weight of its history pressing down on me. I knew that once I crossed the threshold, there would be no going back. The mansion seemed to breathe with its own life, its creaking floors and rusted gates telling stories of a time long gone. But as I stepped through the front door, I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. The key in my pocket now burned against my skin, as though calling me forward. I knew I was close. The mansion had secrets, and I was the one chosen to unlock them. I moved through the dusty hallways, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The silence was deafening. Every room I passed felt as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It wasn't just a house, it was a living entity, a place that had witnessed the rise and fall of generations. And now I was here, standing on the precipice of everything Grandpa had left for me. It didn't take long before I found what I was looking for, a door at the back of the mansion, hidden away behind a tapestry that had long since faded. The key fit perfectly into the lock. My heart raced as I turned it, the mechanism clicking into place with a sound that seemed to reverberate throughout the house. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, there was nothing extraordinary, just a table, some chairs, and an old chest. But the chest was different. It was covered in symbols I couldn't recognize, etched into the wood as though they had been carved by hands long lost to history. This was it. This was the treasure Grandpa had spoken of. I approached the chest slowly, my breath shallow, my fingers trembling. As I opened the lid, a rush of memories flooded my mind. I saw flashes of Grandpa, his face lined with wisdom and age, a man who had lived through battles and triumphs, joys and sorrows. But there was more to him than I had ever known, secrets that had been hidden from the world, secrets that were now mine to uncover. Inside the chest were papers, documents, old photographs, and a journal that belonged to my great-grandfather. I sifted through them carefully, the weight of each piece of history settling heavily on my shoulders. The documents detailed a vast network of investments, secret alliances, and an underground empire that had shaped the family's wealth for generations. It was all laid out before me, each revelation more shocking than the last. Grandpa had been a part of something far larger than I had ever imagined, and I was now in possession of the blueprint for it all. But there was more. At the bottom of the chest, nestled between the pages, was a letter. It was addressed to me, written in Grandpa's hand. My fingers brushed against the paper as I unfolded it, reading the words aloud to myself. My dear grandchild, if you are reading this, then you have uncovered the truth. I've spent my life hiding these secrets, not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I believed it was too dangerous for anyone to know. But you, only you, are meant to carry on the legacy, to finish what I started. The power within our family is not in wealth or status, but in knowledge. This knowledge has the potential to change the world, for better or for worse. You must decide what to do with it. I trust that you will make the right choice. Just remember, not everyone will understand your actions. Some may even seek to stop you. But I have faith in you. Follow your heart and let the truth guide you. With all my love, Grandfather. I stared at the letter, a sense of clarity washing over me. Grandpa had given me a choice, one that was more than just about wealth or power. This was about responsibility, about carrying a legacy that was both a blessing and a curse. I knew that the truth I had uncovered could change everything. It could reshape the future of the family, the country, or even the world. But with that knowledge came a burden I was now tasked with shouldering. As I left the mansion and made my way back down the hills, I could feel the weight of Grandpa's words pressing on me. My journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. The truth was now in my hands, and how I chose to wield it would determine the future. There would be challenges ahead, those who would want to claim the secrets for themselves, those who would seek to silence me. But I was ready. I didn't know exactly what my next steps would be, but I knew I had the strength to face whatever came. I had inherited more than just a fortune. I had inherited a legacy, a truth that could change the world. And it was now my responsibility to decide what to do with it. As I looked back at the mansion one last time, I knew that I would never be the same again. The secret that Grandpa had hidden for so long had now become my own. The legacy was mine to protect, and with it, the power to change the course of history. But more than anything, I had learned that sometimes the greatest treasure isn't found in material wealth, but in the truth and the courage to embrace it, no matter the cost.